A meaningful debate in Iran, where more than 20 people have now been killed in protests since Thursday. Demonstrators who are angry about living standards attacked police stations late into the night as they took to the streets in a number of different cities. John Donnison reports.
Iran has not seen anything like this in almost a decade. The country's leadership under fire in the biggest protests since 2009. People are angry about high unemployment, rising prices and corruption. Police stations have been attacked. Authorities say one policeman was shot dead on Monday in the town of Najafabad. 3 other officers were injured. At least 13 people have now been killed since the unrest broke out last Thursday. The Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, has called on the Iranian authorities to permit debate about what he called the legitimate and important issues raised by protesters. But in recent days, the country's elected president, Hassan Rouhani, has sought to downplay the protests and their significance, saying they were being instigated by Iran's enemies.
Our victory against the US and the Zionist regime is unbearable for our enemies. Our success in the region is intolerable for them. They're after revenge and are trying to provoke people.
But so far, his words have done little to stem the protests. There have been large counter-demonstrations organised in support of the country's leadership. But as the protests enter a 6th day, the message from many Iranians is they want change. John Donnison, BBC News.
Well, let's talk about these protests with Dr. Afshin Shahi, a senior lecturer in Middle East politics at Bradford University, who joins us from our Leeds studio. Thanks very much for being with us. I suppose we've seen demonstrations in Iran before, but the scale of these demonstrations and the number of different places where they're happening, that is different, isn't it?
It is absolutely different. For example, if you look at what happened in 2009, the political geography of the protests were very different. The protests, which were primarily a reaction to a rigged election, were primarily kind of centered in major urban centers like Tehran and Shiraz. Although these protests started from the city of Mashhad, which is a very big city, but very quickly it kind of spread it out across the country. Over the last 3 or 4 days, we have been hearing news from small towns and cities that actually some of the Iranian people have not even heard before. So in terms of a scale and in terms of kind of geography, it is completely a different kettle of fish.
Which begs the question, how much of a threat to the regime is all of this, all these demonstrations that we're seeing?
It is extremely difficult to determine exactly kind of what is happening. Like when all these protests started about 6 days ago, kind of the establishment was very dismissive. Even a lot of observers were very dismissive. They said, okay, this is kind of a blind riot, it's a blip, it's going to go away very quickly. But already, as we know, we are in the 6th day of the protest. Hundreds and hundreds of people have been arrested and around 20 people, at least 20 people have been killed. And so far, there is no sign of basically people calming down. So it is very difficult to determine. But at the same time, I wouldn't be too surprised if basically the Revolutionary Guards, because actually so far they have said that, they're not going to intervene. They're only going to intervene when they think that it is necessary. But if the situation continues like this, probably we're going to see kind of more intervention from the Revolutionary Guards, and that's going to completely change the nature of what is happening at the moment in Iranian streets.
And is the root cause of these protests, is it economic in your view? Is it about living standards and so on? Or is it political? Is it against the government, against the regime?
But how can we separate economic demands from political demands? In the first few days of these protests, basically the Iranian regime, as well as a lot of political observers, tried to kind of create this dichotomy of economic demands versus political demands. But as we noticed in a lot of Iranian cities and towns, very quickly these two kind of objectives, kind of economic objectives and political objectives, merged. People are actually fed up with political corruption. people are fed up with economic corruption, and they believe that the only way to pave the way to a meaningful change, a meaningful economic change, is through radical political reform.
Okay, thank you very much. That's Dr. Afshin Shahi, their senior lecturer in Middle East politics at Bradford University. Thank you for your time.